Welcome to Move Your Mind. My name's Nick Bracks, and this is a podcast where we have real conversations with real people and give real advice. On today's episode, I want to welcome Stefanos Sifandos. With over 15 years of experience in the personal development space, Stefanos is a trained educator, behavioural scientist, and relationship expert with an extensive background in psychology, philosophy, and ecology. I love chatting to him. We got to talk about relationships, trauma, how to find your true self, how to deal with past trauma, how to overcome all of these different issues that can hold us back. And it's just such an important conversation, and it's something that we all need to hear. And I'm felt so lucky to be able to have this chat and be able to broadcast this conversation to you. So I hope you can take something out of it. And just another reminder that the Move Your Mind book is now available globally. You can find all of the links at nickbracks.com/book. And if you want to join the Move Your Mind community, it's a wellness hub with courses, live events. It's got topical information, behind the scenes of the podcast, a whole range of other information. You get reminders to just check in on your mental health each day. All you need to do is go to moveyourmind.me. Stefanos, thanks so much for coming on my podcast, Move Your Mind. It's great to meet you. I found out about yours in the gym and saw a social media clip come up, and you were talking about relationships, and I ended up sitting there and watching about 20 minutes of it and thought, wow, this is super useful. So reached out to you a few months ago and finally get to do it. So thanks for making the time.
Yeah, it's awesome, man. It's great to be here.
Appreciate it. So before we get into it, do you mind just giving a bit of a background on yourself and how you came to be where you are now, just so our listeners can sort of learn a bit about you?
Yeah, for sure. I often lead with whenever I'm asked a similar question, I often lead with the reality of our voids shape our values. And I learned that from Dr. John Demartini many, many years ago. And so what I didn't experience as a kid growing up, is a real priority for me now. Intimacy, connection, basic human needs, right? To be seen, to be heard, to be respected, to be appreciated, and to reciprocate that, right? To be in this loving interchange with others, essentially, right? Where we're really understood and where we can understand others, right? We can be in that trusting, open dialogue, and interaction as well. And so for me as a young kid, I remember wanting to, I grew up in a very hostile environment, very volatile, violent, abusive, emotionally and physically abusive environment. And that came from my parents. And that was very confusing as a kid, because my source of love and safety at some level was also my source of terror. And so growing up through that, it left me very confused, but it also left me asking a lot of questions, like, why is this happening? How is this happening? Who else is it happening to? Is this what life is about? As I got older, I started really contemplating those deeper questions. And it's no surprise that one of my degrees is in philosophy. I just got very curious, philosophically around how can we do life better? When I was a kid, I wanted to be the UN Secretary General because I could heal the world and help the world and save the world and all of that. And, I look back at that now and there was a naivety there, but there was also really a well-intentioned little boy that really just wanted to get out of his own misery and his own pain, right? And so as an adult, we teach what we need to learn the most. And so I got into coaching. I got into psychology and behavioral science, understanding the mind, understanding social dynamics and human potential, and just really explore that. Didn't only study it and research it, but lived it, right? Like really, really lived it. And with all that, I just felt deeply connected and deeply empowered to a purpose and to a way of being in the world. But there was a big missing ingredient, and the missing ingredient was I wasn't working on myself. I was trying to heal myself or create wholeness within myself by creating that or helping others create that in themselves. And at some point, to be completely honest as well, it was an ego trip or an ego complex, not from a vanity perspective or from a malicious perspective, but it was, well, if I can heal them, it was that type of mentality. It was just immature. I didn't know any better, right? And I wasn't facing my stuff. I wasn't really dealing with the abuse. I wasn't dealing with the issues that I had there, right? And it wasn't until I really dealt with them at a deeper level that I was able to then integrate all of the beautiful teachings that I'd been exposed to, the beautiful teachers and wisdom that I'd been exposed to and integrate that because I was becoming integrated. And so now in my journey, I prioritize the integration of self, and I really focus on me. And when I'm working with clients and when I'm working with larger groups, virtually or in person and so forth, the important thing for me is to be a journey mate with these individuals and to learn and grow together and co-create and co-collaborate together, right? And so, but placing myself at the forefront, and what I mean by that is that my healing is my responsibility, and helping others heal, helping others move through their own revelations and realizations is not me doing my own healing, right? And so, yes, there's definitely an aspect of that that allows us to move towards wholeness. And we have to be, from my experience and my perspective, really need to be responsible for our own coming into wholeness or remembering that we are whole. And so that's been my journey the last, near decade now.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. And so many things are coming to mind as you talk about all of that, and so interesting. And I think it's such a fine line, what you're saying, of going and doing that work to help other people, but not getting caught up in sort of neglecting your own needs. And I think on one of the things I was going to ask, I guess that you're touching on is there's a difference between intellectually understanding something and actually doing what you need to do for yourself. And I know for myself, I found from going in therapy for so many years and talking about things and, understanding on an intellectual level what was going on, but not actually doing what I needed to do for myself. And I'm still on that journey now and get caught in that process of talking about it, but not actually doing it. And there's a very big difference, I think. Would you sort of say that's an important thing to be aware of?
100%, man. And what that really is, and what it was for me, was a lack of embodiment. I wasn't embodying I wasn't practicing what I was preaching, right? I wasn't living what I was speaking to. I intellectually understood things. I understood concepts. I could connect dots, but I wasn't living it. I wasn't whole in it. And so I was disconnected. I was fractured. And that embodiment piece is everything, because we recognize that as human beings, we have something called, it's a process of sensating the world, right? Or sensing ourselves through the world and determining what is safe and what isn't. And that's through the neuroception of the body and the nervous system. People could feel, unconsciously, that I wasn't really safe. I wasn't living in that truth. And because I knew that unconsciously, my being knew that, I had to compensate even harder. So the masks had to be thicker, right? The compensation, the compensatory strategies, the coping strategies, the hiding, right? The masquerading had to be more profound. The pretend had to be even more. And that's a difficult act to maintain. And that's why people get ill, or they get sick, or they get run down, or they blow up in extremity, and they blow up their lives because they can't maintain that. I couldn't maintain that, and I blew up my life as a result of that.
Yep. And so did I. Yeah. I had complete outbreak. And, if I look back on that, lucky to be sitting here, even having this conversation when you look at it. And I think for men, this is something I see. So, it's so needed. We need more resource. We need more information about this, because we don't really know how to behave, or how to reach out for help, or how to make those changes, show vulnerability. And as you were talking about in your story, we get conditioned and made to feel like we have to behave in a certain way, and then we don't know what to do. And you do. It's like continually pushing rubbish into a bin. It's going to just explode if you don't do something about it.
Yep, I completely agree, man. And that was really my journey. It really was. And mine was in the realm of relationships and sexuality, sex addiction, sex compulsion, love addiction, love compulsion, prostitution, cheating, infidelity, lying, dishonesty in relationships. I was attempting to fill a void and emptiness within myself, again, that I wasn't addressing. I wasn't addressing the core of what was really happening for me in my world.
Yeah. And do you feel like there's a lot of miseducation when it comes to things like sex addiction and other forms of addiction? Because I think a lot of these things people, or love addiction, people are doing without being actually aware that they're doing it. And it's so tricky, because it's, it's part of our life. It's part of what we're taught to it's a core need. It's where something where we're sort of, we romanticize about, but then you can be caught up in that pattern without even knowing it, I think.
Yeah, most definitely. I think the miseducation comes from not understanding it and it not being mainstream. And the way that we deal with it as a society is in such a way that it demonizes those that are in infidelity or carry that compulsion or that addiction, if you like, right? Now, I'm not saying we don't take responsibility for our actions. We need to, because not only does that empower us to shift and change and move towards wholeness or remembering wholeness and not living a disconnected life, but it also promotes healing and compassion, because it's in those spaces of compassion where safety is bred. And when safety is bred, healing occurs, right? So when we empower ourselves to take responsibility for our actions, many people that are in sex addiction or sex compulsion or love compulsion, love addiction, the experiences that they've had have been quite intense and extreme as well. And I'm not making excuses for people's behavior or my behavior. I'm definitely not doing that. It helps us, though, to bridge a gap to understand, like to really understand, and also choose ourselves and our well-being, right? Because the more we're able to do that, the more we're not feeding into other compulsions. And again, I want to be really clear here. I'm not saying, or I'm not making the statement that someone that is the quote unquote victim of being cheated on, that it's their responsibility to choose themselves and to figure out that person was going to cheat on them, or that they have a love compulsion or a love addiction, and to look at the signs and blah, blah, blah. No, not at all. But we're all in this together, right? We're all in this together. And so how do we grow together? And understanding that people that have any addiction or any compulsion or any aversion or any extreme behavior is usually a product of unresolved wounds or unresolved trauma, whether it be physical, emotional, sexual, or a combination of both, acute and chronic, or a combination of both, or even little t trauma just over a long period of time compounded into one's self-worth. And so we're attempting to seek validation, to seek worthiness outside of ourselves through compulsions, whether it's heroin, whether it's food, whether it's sex, whether it's codependence and people pleasing and appeasing, whatever our strategies are. What we're essentially attempting to do is feel whole, but we're trying to feel whole outside of ourselves. And that becomes a very slippery slope, because we can't control what is outside of us. We can barely control what is within us, right? Even that is up for debate, that we have this depth of free will that exists. Probably another conversation for another time, but we definitely can't control what others think and what others feel. And so that's why we contort, right? That's why we try and shape ourselves, because we're trying to figure out, what if we do this, will that make them love us? Will that make them care for us? And if we can't get that, we need to put pleasure back into our bodies. And that's where many addictions come from, is we can't be with the pain that we have. We don't know how to be with it. It doesn't feel safe to be with it. We've often been judged for it in the past. And so we need to put pleasure back into our bodies. Again, is it a needle? Is it cocaine? Is it some other drug? Is it marijuana 3 times a day? Is it alcohol? Is it workaholism? Is it food? Is it binge watching TV? Is it spending? Is it overspending, consumerism? Is it sex? What is it? And so we need the pleasure, and often we need the peak experiences. Sometimes it's adrenaline. You're an adrenaline junkie. You're an extreme sports enthusiast. I would argue that the vast majority of extreme sports enthusiasts and adrenaline-seeking, not adrenaline junkies, but that's what they're called, but adrenaline-seeking individuals that have an attachment or an addiction to that, I would say they have tremendous unresolved abuse issues or wounding or trauma that they're compensating for by inputting pleasure in their body. And the bigger the pain, the bigger the pleasure, and the continual process of that. And so for me, that was me avoiding my pain. And because it was still there, it was simmering up, it was below the surface, I needed to do something with it. And instead of dealing with it, actually being with it, because I didn't know how, and I wasn't willing to at those times, I needed to put pleasure in my body to distract myself from it. And so that's what most of us do. And it's a very misunderstood thing. And I completely understand why, because and I want to be very careful with the word victim, right? Because when we say victim, then we have to assume there's a villain and there's going to be a savior or a hero as well, right? And then we end up being in this complex, this triangle, this drama that places us in particular positions. But for sake of the conversation, let's speak to that. But even those that are perpetual victims, or those that have perpetual similar experiences where they're constantly getting hurt or taken advantage of, that again is unresolved trauma, right? And that person that is attempting to dominate in power and control, somewhere in their lives didn't have control. And so they need to exert that control now over others. And those that are being controlled potentially are very familiar with that. And we attract what's familiar because familiarity feels safe, because it's comfortable, it's known. And the unknown can be very scary for us. So we end up in these dynamics and we just keep repeating patterns because we don't actually consciously, cognitively know. We're not cognizant of the fact that we're attracting and we're co-creating experiences in our lives to actually choose differently than we once chose, that brought us to fracture. So now we can choose differently to be in wholeness, but we're not aware of that. So we just keep repeating the same. You notice people will say, oh, this is the fifth boyfriend in 10 years or the fifth girlfriend in 12 years that I've had. And it's the same thing. And I don't know what I'm doing wrong. And you're not doing anything wrong. You're just operating from a set of patterns that are very familiar to you. And you're unaware of those patterns, and you're unaware of how to shift them, and you're unaware of what's possible. So we're just going to keep repeating because that's familiar to us.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And you see it literally everywhere you look. It's happening, and it's happening to so many of us, more people than are aware of it. And do you think it's pretty much impossible to have a healthy relationship until you do address these things?
It's a really good question. It's such a simple question, man. And it's a really powerful question. I would say the chances of having a quote unquote healthy relationship without addressing one's issues and the other's issues, and then your issues together in the relationship, is very unlikely. Very unlikely. You may, for a period of time, when you're in the limerence phase of relating, in the honeymoon period, you may for a period of time, because you're polarized in the way you present yourself and what you're actually seeing, because your hormones are just everywhere. There's a particular hormonal signature in the honeymoon period that takes place that detracts us from the stuff that is unpleasant and undesirable, right? So, for however long that honeymoon period lasts for, you may be in that quote unquote healthy relationship or appear to be healthy. But if stuff comes up and we don't address it, and it's a repetitive pattern for us, then we're not really in healthy spaces, are we? So, how do we move through that? What do we do? We've got to address our stuff, essentially, is what we need to do. That's the path that we need to take. And that can be a really challenging path. It very much was for me, because the ego deaths that are involved in that, and quite frankly, the suicide contemplation for many, for me included, can be very, very deep. And the unworthiness and the shame that comes to the surface that has been repressed and suppressed for so long, that's intense. And that's why we avoid it. It's very convenient to avoid our pain.
It's incredibly, it's one of the most confronting things we can do, and to have to sit with that, it's tough. That's why most people don't do it, because it's such a hard thing to confront. And I guess on the other end of that question, would you say once you are acknowledging and sitting with that pain and working on it, you can still be in a relationship if both people were working on those things, but it's still very much in the process of dealing with it, as long as you've got that openness and sort of communication? It's not about, you don't necessarily have to be at that point where you've necessarily healed everything, as long as you are both having that openness to work on it together. Would you say that's sort of another side of it, where you can have that relationship with, communication as you grow? Thank you so much for supporting Move Your Mind. We're expanding the offerings of the organisation, and we're tailoring everything we do to suit you guys and to try and answer to all of your needs and the questions that you send in. The book is available globally. You can find all of the links at nickbracks.com/book. And we've just released the Move Your Mind community. We've currently got a men's community group, a women's community group, a general group. We're going to be loading up other groups, and you can find all of the links at moveyourmind.me. This group's been created based on the needs of what we've heard and learnt throughout running Move Your Mind. And we have live events, we've got courses, we've got huge amounts of value, the ability to share information, share ideas, work in groups together to grow and share your learnings, to learn about different topics. You get email reminders. There's a whole lot of features in there. We're constantly updating it, and we're so excited to share it with you. You can find all of the information about it at moveyourmind.me.
100%. If both people are willing, or however many people are in your intimate relationship, if you're all willing to really move through your stuff and be patient with each other and compassionate with each other, and maybe seek outside counsel that can be a more objective voice and perspective for you, because, you know, we're relational beings and we need each other in that way. But it definitely, part of your journey needs to be with each other, of course. If there's a willingness and an openness there, then yes. And there is a caveat to that. And the caveat is that if the wounding is too deep and it's too intense, and that's a subjective measure, and it may pull away from the relationship, because sometimes the healing that we do, we need to be on our own. We can't be juggling and balancing an intimate relationship and holding an intimate romantic sexual relationship in one hand whilst we're working with very deep trauma in the other hand. Sometimes we can, it depends, but more often than not, we cannot. And so we have to, from my perspective and from what I've seen in the world and been in this, you know, in the personal development space for 20 plus years, and working with my own trauma, and finally practicing what I preach, you know, when I say finally, the last, you know, eight to 10 years, really, there is certain trauma and there are certain wounds that we have to address on our own. We need the space to do so, and we just won't be able to show up in that relationship. And we have to be astute enough and mature enough and gracious enough towards self and towards our partners to own that and be very honest in that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. That's and I guess there would just be, you've got to have that understanding and willingness to try and make that change at the beginning. How many people do you think are sort of unaware of these things?
I mean, I would say the vast majority of relationships and the vast majority of people, you know, we live in echo chambers, right? Yep. Like, it's easy for me to speak to my community or the communities that I move in, because at some level, like attracts like. But when we look at the world as a whole, we look at mass media and we look at what we're exposed to at a more generalized mass media collective level, right? And I just want to be very mindful of the terminology that I use, but many people are not awake to themselves, and they're not aware of their life experiences that have shaped who they are as adults and are contributing to the disconnection or disparity or pain that they're feeling. And I'm not necessarily, I'm really specifically referring to psycho-emotional, psychosocial, relational pain, right? Like, I'm talking about patterns of behavior, how we give and receive love, self-worth, how we pursue intimacy, how we show up in conflict. I'm not talking about more existential crises or such as famine or poverty or homelessness. I'm speaking very specifically to our emotional upbringing and the behaviors, beliefs, attitudes, patterns, ways of being formed during our developmental years based on our relationships with our primary caregivers or lack thereof. And everything that's associated with that, physiologically and psychologically. And I would say the vast majority of people are not aware of that, because we're not really taught in the mainstream that that's a thing.
100%. Yeah, exactly. We're not taught about that, and we're not aware of it, and that's where you're getting shaped. Your whole upbringing. It's like programming a computer. It's sort of, all of these things are happening that you're unaware of, and on these patterns. And then by the time you're an adult, you're so conditioned that you're not even aware of it. And then, so to become aware of it's one thing, then to try and actually recondition that and change it, that's such a difficult thing. And, you know, that's what I've experience. You become aware of it, and you see these patterns happening, and you're actually aware of them, but you still can't often change them even in that moment. So it's like such a difficult thing to change. But we need to be aware of it. We need to have that education, which, like you're saying, it's not talked about. It's not something that's common knowledge or a normal conversation, I guess.
Mm. Yeah, I agree. And you're right when you say about, we can only take action once we have awareness, or at least deliberate action. And there are layers and levels of awareness as well. Because sometimes we become aware of something, we make a connection, we think, oh, wow, the fact that my father was away a lot, wow, actually, I figured out now. I realize that that's why I have issues committing. I have this fear of abandonment, fear of being left. And so I struggle to be in relationship, and I make excuses as to why I can't be. And then that level of awareness maybe then opens up something deeper. It opens up another door of awareness. And so it's this beautiful dance of awareness, taking some level of action, whatever that looks like. And sometimes it's just being with the awareness. It's sitting with it. It's not necessarily needing to do anything with it. That's a very masculine way of approaching that. And that's okay. But sometimes we just need to be with. We need to feel. We need to integrate. We need to create spaciousness. We need to be in deeper communion with that awareness before we can take this direct action that changes our behavior, right? But that awareness may open up other awarenesses. And so there are layers to that. And yes, you're right. At some point, we need to and would want to take action to make change. But that's very difficult. It's very difficult. And it's not impossible.
It's so hard. Yeah.
Definitely not impossible. Yeah. But it's just very difficult. And that's why there are so many blocks. That's why I'm a massive advocate of being supported in transition, being supported in transformation. Whether you have a coach or a therapist or a shaman or spiritual healer, an energy healer, a combination of all these different people, a men's group or a women's group or a group of friends that you can lean into, or family, whatever it may be, right? Sometimes family of origin can be difficult because there can be traumatic history there, not always, but often. But having people that support you and see you in non-judgmental, compassionate ways really accelerates the healing and supports you in feeling safe enough to explore the things that are unknown and unfamiliar that actually will give you freedom.
Yep. Yeah, because like anything, isn't it? It's like, if you're trying to go to the gym for the first time, it's going to be pretty tough to stick to doing it if you're just going on your own. If you're trying to motivate yourself, we need support. Everyone needs support in all of these different areas. So yeah, no, I think I love all the points you're talking about. And for men, how important do you think this conversation is? Do you think it's something that men? It needs to be talked about more. Like we're suppressed, and we don't have that on a broad level. There's not enough sort of resource out there for people to access this kind of information. Yeah,
statistically speaking, when we look at the resources available specifically for men, they're quite low in comparison, right? The reason why this conversation is important for men is because there is a stigma, and there is particularly in Australia, there is a stigma and there is a belief that men either can't or shouldn't access certain emotional parts of themselves. And so therefore their range becomes limited. And when we grow up with that belief, we become stunted, because it's not like we're missing limbic system. We also feel, we also emote, and we need to be taught how to do that appropriately and how to move that energy through our body so it doesn't become stuck, and therefore we don't compensate for that pain that we're feeling or that discomfort that we're feeling, and we don't do erratic behavior and unconscious behavior that's often extreme and very intense and hurtful towards others and towards self. And when we look at suicide and we look at depression and we look at statistics around that, particularly with males, it's very, very sad. I read something a few days ago that was very, very striking for me. The second greatest cause of death for Black boys in America aged 10 to 14 is suicide.
Wow.
10 to 14 years old, the second greatest cause of death is suicide.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that tears me up just thinking about that. You know, I mean, there's obviously the layer of race and injustice around that, and systemic suppression. I mean, there's so many layers to that. But just take that statistic of suicide, 10 to 14 years of age. It's the second leading cause of death for boys in that age group. It's heavy, man. That's just one statistic, and I'm not one to cherry pick statistics. I just remember that because I literally read it a few days ago, and it was in context of some other information that I was looking through. But that's really sad. And again, there are many other statistics out there for men, women, for all people that are really sad as well. And this is why the conversation of mental wellness and emotional wellness and relational wellness is so fucking important, because we're slowly dying or slowly killing each other or killing ourselves. You know, when you look at, oh man, not to get on a tangent, but when you look at so much of the collective oppression that so many different people experience, right? When we look at people that are mentally unstable, that are unwell, that are committing horrific crimes, when you really trace that back, you're looking at collective reasons and individual reasons, like in the household, but also in society, in their immediate neighborhoods, in where they grew up, whether it's poverty, whether it's scarcity, whether it's violence, whether it's, you know, challenges, mental health challenges in the home, whether it's absent parents, drug addictions, drug abuse, alcoholism. There are sources and causes for people committing horrific crimes, and putting people in jail and throwing them away and locking them away is not healing or helping society. I get the prison industrial complex. I get the mechanisms behind it. I get the intention to some degree, but a lot of it's bullshit. And that's clearly it's not helping. I mean, crime isn't necessarily going down. Mental wellness is mental unwellness is on the rise. Yeah. Again, you know, so we have to take a different approach to this. And part of it is having these conversations. Part of it, to be really honest, is those that are able, that are privileged enough to do so, that have resources, that have capacity. It is about self-healing. It really is. When we look at the basic principles and fundamentals of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? We're looking at if your base survival needs aren't met, you won't be able to go into higher realms of thinking and critical reflection and healing and spirituality and deeper contemplation and service and so forth. Like, you need to eat, you need to have shelter, you need to feel safe in your home. Like, you just have to have those things. And at some level that makes a lot of sense, right? And so for those of us that have those base levels, it is from my perspective, it's our responsibility and our duty to work on ourselves so that we can be beacons of lights for others, so that we can support others in their journey and continue to support our own selves. And there's a domino effect that comes with that, right? And recognizing that those of us that are in those positions, that we have that privilege. And that is a privilege. That is a gift, right? And maybe it's a gift we've bestowed on ourselves. Maybe it's a gift that has been bestowed upon us for various reasons. But I think it's important to really take ownership of that.
So many great points in that. And yeah, totally agree, because like you said, when you're in survival mode, how can you have you don't have the bandwidth to then go and look at these things. You're thinking, well, I need to put food on the table. I need to make money. I need to do this. How on earth can I freaking think about all these other things? So if you are in that position, yeah, it is a responsibility, and that's how you start breaking that pattern, and then you pass that on, and that starts the conversation on a broader level, and it needs to start in that way. Yeah, I think it's such a good point about where we begin with that. So yeah, I think so many things that you've touched on there are just so important, and I guess as well, it's, like you were saying, I think we're so quick to label people for their behaviors because we don't have, again, it's all part of the same thing. If people start making that change, we'll have a bigger understanding on a broader level. And we label people because if we see someone committing a crime or doing this or doing that, instantly they're just labeled as a criminal or a bad person or whatever it is, when it's like, okay, yeah, the crime's not good. That should be punished. But why can't we have empathy or look at, what are the things that happened to this person? Why did they get to that place? And, we're not educated enough on that. And that, the more empathy we can have, the more we can really start to relate and make those changes. So it's just all, such a societal shift that needs to continue over time. My name's Nick Bracks, and I'm a storyteller who has dedicated my entire adult life to creating positive conversations around mental health. In recent years, discussions around mental health have become less taboo and entered the mainstream vernacular. I've delivered over 1,000 mental health seminars around the globe, including several TED Talks, and I believe we all have a story to tell. In my book, Move Your Mind, I cover my story and stories from people that inspire me, as well as insights from world-leading mental health experts. This book will help you to learn how to recognise mental health issues before they become a problem. Use your personal challenges as motivators, take ownership of your well-being, and create new daily habits that increase happiness and reduce stress.
Yeah, you touched on something important, I think, empathy and compassion. And when we're able to cultivate that within ourselves, because we're on a healing journey, we're on a growth journey, an expansive journey, we're able to be more of that for others. We're more likely to be that for others as well. And so when other people, I know for me personally, when I experience others being compassionate and empathetic towards me and understanding and really feeling me and not judging me in those moments, very healing for me, very healing. And my shame becomes diffused. It takes a minute sometimes, but I'm able to bring that shame into the light, whatever it is that I'm working through in that moment. And I'm able to move it on. It doesn't have to be stuck in my body and in my mind. And I don't have to operate from that place. And so, yeah, that empathy is that compassion is so important. And one of the key ways that we cultivate that is by journeying into the inner self, journeying into the depths of who we are, the depths of our soul, and expressing from unknown, mysterious places within. And there's something purely beautiful around that. And it's confronting, but it's also liberating.
It is. And that was one of the first things I learned when I got into acting and went to acting school. It was sort of the teaching, which I think it's one of the best, life sort of development things you can do. You sort of, to be able to play another character, you've got to first understand yourself and get over your own ego and be able to look at all of your own patterns. And you've got to have that intimate understanding of yourself if you want to be able to play a different character, because then you've got to be able to look at them without judgment and think, okay, what's caused this pathway? How did they come to these conclusions? What are all these things that can happen, and actually understand them with empathy, without judgment, which it's, you can't really do that unless you've done the work on yourself.
Yeah, agreed. It is crucial at every level, and it's deeply rewarding as well. Like, I just think, what's that old adage? Like, nothing easy is worth having, something along those lines, right? I mean, not complete agreement with that, but I mean, I understand the effort behind it. When we exert effort and we really, quote unquote, work for something, the value of that thing that we're moving towards or attempting to embody, it becomes a higher grade of value. And the appreciation that we cultivate in that process, and the deeper sense of self and the way that we relate to ourselves, are all of the things that happen along that journey of accomplishment or reaching the goal or whatever it may be. We discover a lot about ourselves, and we negate that if we don't do the hard work, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, I think that's an incredibly important point. And, this is another conversation, but, with social media and with mainstream media, with how the world's structured now, everyone wants instant gratification. Everyone's looking for that quick fix. How do I get rich quick? How do I become famous? How do I do this? When even if those things were handed to you on a silver platter, that's not actually what you want, because it's not about the actual end goal. Like you're saying, it's like I work out every morning. And for me, if that was easy, then I wouldn't get any value. I like the feeling of getting up, doing something difficult, how it makes me feel. Then I'm like, okay, now I'm ready to start the day. That's the thing you get out of it. It's the hard work. So people are trying to get things that they don't actually need or really want. So anyway, we finish every episode with 5 closing questions. These can be sort of quick fire answers that come to mind. The first one is, whatever comes to mind. So the first one here is, what do you like most about your childhood?
Oh, Walking around my neighborhood with my grandparents, and my grandfather had my Italian grandparents and my maternal grandparents. I'm half Greek, half Italian. They had a beautiful vegetable and fruit garden, and I would pick garden peas and put them in a little bowl, and then walk around the block with my grandmother, like eating the peas, and she'd be telling me stories, and that was a really beautiful memory. Yeah,
I love that. Yeah, thanks for sharing that one. What do you think is the biggest burden on mental health in society today?
The unspoken pain and the stigma that's attached to it. There's like there's something wrong with you if you have mental health issues. You know, you're damaged, you're broken. Yeah.
Yeah. What's your personal definition of happiness?
Yeah, you know, I created a model for this, and I could talk about the model, but I'm actually not going to talk about the model. For me, there's a sweet spot, right? There's a sweet spot between comfort and discomfort, and if we stay in discomfort for too long, it pulls us away from pleasure or hedonism or happiness. And if we stay in comfort too long, we feel a little restless. Mm-hmm. We feel a little edgy, like we need some challenge to grow, because one of the prerogatives I believe as being human is this unconscious, unspoken thing, is that we're here to grow. And you can't really grow without being uncomfortable at some level. But there's a sweet spot there between discomfort and comfort where we're almost suspended, right? And in that suspension, there's a sigh of relief. There's a deeper knowing that takes place, and we'll get micro moments of it, and sometimes macro moments. And in that space, there's deep gratitude as well. The physiological signature that follows that too, and the spiritual signature that follows that. But it's in that space where we just feel that happiness.
Yeah, no, I know exactly what you mean, and yeah, it's a great feeling when you're in that. What are you most afraid of?
Oh, many things. The two things that come to mind. I've just had a baby girl, so she's about 9 weeks and 2 days old. And
congratulations.
First thing is just fucking that up, like fucking not being a good father, not being a healthy father. There's that, not doing enough, not being enough for her, and for my wife, and for us, and all of that. But the thing that really gets me is not living in my potential, and looking back at my life and thinking, I didn't quite go there. You know, that's scary to have that thought for me. And there are so many. I'm a type of person that has so many different passions and so many experiences I want to be in, and it's reconciling that and what I make that mean if it happens or if it doesn't happen. Yeah,
I couldn't agree more. I think, if the only one thing that I find scary is looking back on life and regretting, thinking, what if I tried this? What if I did that? Who cares if you fail at it? But it's like just that regret that would that's terrifying. So final one, what are you most proud of?
Yeah, the person that I've become, the embodiment that I hold, the very deep work, the very personal transformative work that I have gone through and continue to go through to be who I am and to show up in the world in greater authenticity and realness, and just committed to that path. I really committed to that path. And to be clear, I'm not a personal growth junkie. There are times where I'm not interested in that. I just want to watch the UFC or watch a good movie or what, and it's not just fleeting moments. It's not about, we always have to grind and we always have to go deep into our stuff and we should always be feeling pain and excavating the pain. Definitely not. That's not the way I operate. However, I'm just extremely proud of how far I've come, and what I've been willing to go through and traverse to get to where I am today, and where I continue to go to continue to grow, essentially.
I love that. Well, yeah, Stefanos, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I could talk to you for hours about this, and I really appreciate it. And just finally, for our listeners, I'll put this all in the show notes, but where can we send them to learn more about you?
For sure. Yeah, you can learn more about me at my on my website, stefanos.sifandos.com, where you can look at my program, service offerings, coaching, my new book that's being released in September. You can find me on social media at Stefanos Sifandos. Anywhere there.
Appreciate it, mate. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Appreciate you.
Thanks to Stefanos Sifandos for joining me today for Move Your Mind. And just another reminder that the Move Your Mind book is now available globally. You can find all of the links at nickbracks.com/book, and the Move Your Mind community can be joined by simply going to moveyourmind.me. Thanks again for supporting us. We really appreciate it, and I'd love to hear suggestions about future episodes. Please leave us any comments, share the podcast with whoever you think would benefit from it. Thanks again for supporting us, and looking forward to speaking to you all soon.